parts of this comic, I like what they're trying to do with Superman as an inspiration. Unlike Frank Miller, Mark Waid understands what Superman should be, but the way that he writes his decision-making in this, I would say the only good decision that Clark makes in the entire comic book is when he chooses to come back in the first place. Everything else he does in this comic book is the opposite of what he should be doing.
He should have been, I think, injured and forced involuntarily into retirement, and then it becomes psychosomatic of where he thinks he shouldn't leave because the world has moved on from Superman. He shouldn't have imposed it himself,
Yes.
I think.
We'll get on to why he chose to in a few minutes, I'm
Definitely.
sure.
So then what happens is Harlequin and the heir to the Mr. Terrific name start fighting these giant skeleton robots on top of a cable car. The cable car's about to collapse. A bunch of innocent people are going to fall into, I believe it's the Hudson River. And then Superman comes along, emerges out of a typhoon, and apprehends both the robots and the reckless anti-heroes. And this is actually an allusion to Revelation. So there's a verse from chapter 1. And in the midst of the lampstands I saw one like a son of man, dressed in a robe that reached down to his feet, with a golden breastplate around his chest. His head and his hair were white with the whiteness of wool, like snow, like his sideburns there, and his eyes were a burning flame. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth there protruded a sharp two-edged sword, and his face shone like the sun in all its brilliance. So obviously you have the House of S logo across his chest. He's got the white sideburns, his laser eyes. He comes up out of a typhoon, which is what saves the cable car from falling, and his feet hardly ever touch the ground. So being irradiated with the brilliance of the sun, where he gets a lot of his powers, it's easy to see how the Christ-like return of Superman can be drawn directly to the imagery of Revelation.
Okay, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, because obviously you reread Revelation for all of this in preparation. I was wondering, with a lot of the issues that I have with character decisions in this, would you say, is this pretty... let me see how I can formulate this question. Is it trying to stick closely to what's described in Revelation to the point where it's forcing characters into positions strictly to keep up these allusions to Revelation?
And my theory is actually that Mark Waid disregards biblical morality for his boomer institutionalism, because Revelation basically says that Magog and Wonder Woman were right.
Really?
Yes.
In what sense?
There is a verse in Revelation, I think it's 21:7.
So for context, Magog is one of the leaders of the new breed of superheroes. He's got a big spiky helmet, big metal armor, as you would expect. He chose, after Joker came to Metropolis and went on a rampage that killed 93 people, he chose to kill the Joker.
Yeah.
Which he did before Superman could get to him, and Superman was just going to, apprehend him. The police had already apprehended him, so there was no point in Superman even looking for him in the first place, really. The police managed to get to him before Superman or Magog. While he's in police custody, Magog just shoots him, kills him dead. There's a public trial where Magog is acquitted of murder, and newspaper front cover shows that the public overwhelmingly supported Magog's decision to do this. On this basis, Superman decided, like a complete whiny baby, that I'm not as popular as I used to be, so goes into self-imposed exile. And I understand what it's trying to say. It's trying to say that Superman is recognizing the changing of the tides, that public opinion is going against him, perhaps his style...
the comic industry is pushing out these Golden and Silver Age heroes for the newfangled image heroes.
Yes, I recognise the allegory that it's trying to pull, I recognise the themes that it's trying to push, but it makes Superman into a whiny baby who just leaves and decides to abandon humanity for 10 years because people don't like me as much anymore. Yeah. And I understand, again, there's supposed to be an element of pride motivating his decisions, which he needs to abandon later on towards the end of the story so that he can fully embrace the mantle that he's supposed to, leave the darkness of the pride behind him so he can become more of an inspiration again. But it does mean that every decision that Superman makes, other than returning in the first place, is a bad decision, is a stupid decision.
He's very emotional and excessively reactive rather than reasonable, I think.
He's massively idealistic where he should be pragmatic. One of the big decisions that he makes is when they start to round up all of the newfangled superheroes who are causing death and destruction on the street, is that he goes to Apocalypse and speaks to Orion, Darkseid's son, and Orion just says to him explicitly, listen, if you've got a problem, I've got problems here, but it's nothing I can't handle. Send them all here if you want somewhere to hold these people. Superman decides against this for no other reason than, that's not what I do. He's like, people keep saying in this that if I do the obviously right choice, they keep saying, well, that makes me a fascist.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm not going to do the obviously right choice. And you can see Mark Waid's completely stupid ideological predilections forcing the characters into these positions. So what he does instead of being a fascist, all he does is construct a gigantic gulag in the middle of the irradiated Kansas wasteland.
Modelled on the Legion of Doom's headquarters from Super Friends.
And puts them all there instead. And it's like, well, okay, so you've got a situation where they're going to be imprisoned anyway. Do you put them far, far, far away from Earth where they won't cause any more trouble? No, that's way too much of a fascist move right there. So I'll do the exact same thing, except where they could potentially all end up fighting each other and blow up the Earth.
The interesting thing as well...
It's infuriating how stupid Superman is in this entire comic book.
Again, more of Waid's liberal nonsense is that Orion says how in some civilizations liberty is impossible for adoption, and that it is every bit as paralyzing as fascism, and then he
actually makes a very good point.
He makes a Huntington class of civilizations point rather than an end of history point, which ends up being true considering 9/11, for example, because you can't just golden arches theory virtue to the rest of the world. If you don't want to adopt scientific advancement, you need the culture there for a civilization to be ready to adopt advancement. And so if you give, for example, the Krogan in Mass Effect nukes to a bunch of cavemen, it doesn't end very well.
No, of course not. And that's one of the things that soured my experience reading the comic book, because the comic book is still a decent story that's massively elevated by the artwork. But I felt like a lot of the biblical references were kind of crowbarred in after a certain point to make for striking visual imagery.
They're bastardized, so the morality of it doesn't match up. But the Revelation stories use the framework to make it seem operatic and Judgment Day-ish. Yeah. It's interesting that you raise the point of Orion being a fascist. I think, again, Waid doesn't understand, or if he does, he purposefully mangles the political philosophy to make his own point. And I think it might be an American thing, not insult to our American viewers. Not. Because Orion is not fascist, he's a hereditary monarchist. Yeah. His dad is Darkseid, so of course he has a right to take over Apocalypse.
And even then, he's trying to rule Apocalypse in a more benevolent way and give them some element of liberty, but the people aren't ready for that. And he basically explicitly says, listen, if I want them to accept my liberty, I'm going to have to brainwash them into it. I'm going to have to do some social engineering conditioning to get them into it, because that's what this population wants.
So Waid turns this role of him basically being a benevolent king into, but you're actually evil because you look like your dad and you look like Darkseid. Well, physiognomy check, I guess. Thank you, Mark Waid. You wouldn't want that for yourself, would you little goblin?
I don't know. Listen, just because Orion looks like a golem, he actually looks like a relatively noble golem.
Yeah, he seems to have made Apocalypse relatively peaceful and prosperous despite the aesthetics, and so I think this is another case where the message is overriding the logic inherent to the story. Speaking of which, the idea that you came back to when we started this little tangent was, does Revelation derail the logical consistency of the story? No. The imagery of Revelation is appropriated, but he doesn't stick to the morals of Revelation. Here's a verse from Christ himself, and you see if it sounds more like Superman or more like Magog and Wonder Woman. Then the one sitting on the throne spoke. Now I am making the whole of creation anew, he said. Write this. That is what I am saying is sure and what will come true. And then he said, it is already done. I am the Alpha and the Omega. Much like Orion and Darkseid. The beginning and the end. I will give water from the well of life, free to anyone who is thirsty. It is the rightful inheritance of the one who proves victorious over Gog and Magog, funnily enough. And I will be his God and a son to me. But the legacy for cowards, those who break their word, or worship obscenities, for murderers and fornicators, and for the fortune tellers, idolaters, or any other sort of liars, is the second death in the burning lake of sulphur.
Degeneracy BTFO'd.
Yes. If you do not repent, you do not get forgiveness. And so if you are an unapologetic sinner, murderer, rapist, adulterer, liar, then you do not get to benefit from the reification of the kingdom of heaven. You just burn in hell for all eternity with the treacherous Antichrist. Does that sound like Superman and Waid to you?
Yes, a little bit in this, especially given...
Really?
Well,
I was going to say the other way around. It's more Magog and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, the other way around. But at the end of this, Superman's about to murder a bunch of people at the UN for nuking a bunch of superheroes who were about to basically destroy the world. So the UN shockingly did the right thing in this narrative. Another bit of Waid's ideological blind spots kicking in.
Yeah.
But the POV character Norman, the preacher or pastor, is it?
Pastor Norman McKay.
Yeah. The pastor. He shows up and tells him, "Forgive yourself."
No.
No. You need to repent for everything that you did, because you are
Screwed up royally.
You are the whole reason. All of the bad things that happened were all kicked off like the domino effect through every bad decision Superman made, and every decision he made along the way was the exact opposite one. And speaking of Magog, it really annoyed me that Magog is the reason that Kansas and most of America's breadbasket blew up and got irradiated, because he was the one organising the attack against Parasite, or at least that's the way it's portrayed. There's a very interesting moment in the second issue after they've started to round up all of these super meta-humans that are causing destruction, where you see Magog, after they track him down, in Kansas, and there's a nice parallel drawn in the artwork between when you first see Clark putting everything together at his farm.
Well, so funnily enough, Frank Casey was Ross's photo reference, and it was the photo reference of both Superman and Magog.
Oh, well, that makes sense. And Magog is similarly trying to put together a farm. What he's obviously trying to do is trying to put Kansas back into a state where it will be able to grow again. He's trying
Hospitable,
He's trying to fix his mistakes, because he feels horribly guilty for what he did, because it caused the death of over 1 million people. They confront him, they get into a little spat, and then Magog ends up breaking down, weeping, saying, like, "I wish someone would forgive me. I can't take it back. I'm haunted by the 1 million people. Arrest me, kill me, do whatever, just make it stop." It's very interesting, the regret and the remorse that he feels. And then he's just put in a prison cell, and that's the last we hear of him. We see him in a few panels. We know that he survives to the end of the story. That's the last time we get any dialogue from him.
Yeah,
that's the only time we get any character development and dialogue from him. And it's so interesting, and it's just thrown aside for the sake of narrative expediency.
It's fascinating as well that at the end of the story, he joins the other metahumans on Paradise Island, who are going to be rehabilitated with new training when Wonder Woman becomes queen.
They basically agree that they're going to brainwash a bunch of people on Paradise Island.
Yeah.
And they were trying to brainwash them in the gulag in the first place by having Superman holograms show up and say, like, "You know the difference between right and wrong, fellow citizens."
Why does he sound like Bane?
I kind of went with
I was born in the gulag.
It was a Bane Obama.
The worst combination, both communists. See, it's interesting that in the sequels and prequels, Magog is and Gog and Magog are conflated in the kingdom. They become villains, like outright villains, out to destroy Superman. So it seems that aspect of that conversation is taken, that there's a rivalry, but it's not built upon his rehabilitation. Especially in Thy Kingdom Come, it's actually quite interesting, because I really liked this, as a brief aside, especially this edition, which is
that
foil
is a
cover.
lovely edition.
Just after we spent all that time ragging against special edition covers, I have this one, I suppose.
It's really nice.
It's wonderful. This is Alex Ross co-writing with Jeff Johns. He even draws some of the art, and I believe it's Dale Eaglesham. And in this, it is FDR, his great-great-grandson, and FDR put together the Justice Society, is a lance corporal in the American military who is injured and killed, and a giant god from Third World, the war that preceded Fourth World, Jack Kirby's Fourth World, called Gog, resurrects him and makes him his herald, and so he starts going around the world building an army for Gog, so Magog and Gog, like in Revelations, build an army together to take over the world and make everyone worship Gog, because Gog is meant to be a benevolent god. But then what happens is, in the story, is they find out that Gog has rooted himself into the earth over the course of 6 days, and on the 7th day, if you stop worshipping him, he will leave Earth and Earth will crack apart. So Kingdom Come Superman decapitates him and sticks him in the source wall. But it's interesting how Magog, in this and his other iterations across the timelines and universes, is just an out-and-out villain, when in this, he's meant to be rehabilitated and on the side of the heroes. And even before he is rehabilitated in this, I found it's quite interesting that, again, they use the symbology of Revelation to make him look evil, right? And he's meant to represent the Rob-Liefeld-ification of DC Comics. So in Revelation, it says in 20-7, when 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will emerge to lead astray the nations in the four corners of the earth. Gog and Magog, that's actually meant to be parts of Russia, in order to gather them for battle. They are numerous as the sands of the sea. Interesting, it's meant to be parts of Russia just after the Cold War as well. So he's meant to be allied with Satan. He also has in Revelations 5, then I saw standing in the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders, a lamb that had been slain. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth in the entire world. So the head of the ram is another thing. And Alex Ross said that's actually accidental. Because in a CBR interview, he said, Magog, that's a character that Mark Waid invented that was just really put to me like, come up with the most god-awful Rob-Liefeld sort of design you can. What I was stealing from was really only 2 key designs of Rob's. The design of Cable, I hated it. I felt it looked like they just threw up everything on the character. The scars, the thing going on in his eye, the arm, what's with all the guns. But the best thing is, when I put those elements together with the helmet of Shatterstar, I think that was his name, or the ram horns and the gold, suddenly it held together as one of the designs that I felt happiest with in the entire series. I don't think it ended up looking buffoonish. In a way, that gold ram's head effect took it to a new, almost biblical metaphor that had a nice little touch to it. It's the kind of thing that I should have been striving for, but it was almost accidental. So they give all this imagery of aligned with Satan, the nation's led astray, he's the Rob Liefeld-esque character. And yet, when he shows up to Joker's trial, and Joker will almost undoubtedly be stuck in Arkham Asylum to escape again, like he has for...
We don't even know if it'll be Arkham Asylum, because he's being tried in Metropolis, so it could just be some random prison that's even easier to escape from.
Very true, and he is quite old by this point, so Joker has been stuck around and claiming many lives over the course of his long,
and this was
deranged
just his
life.
latest massacre.
Yes, and the public are very much on side, as you see with the front cover of the Daily Planet. And in this day and age, the British public, for the execution of terrorists, some recent data from 2021, found out that 51% of Britons would support reinstating the death penalty for convicted proven terrorists. So what did, by the logic of Christ towards unrepentant sinners, towards the logic of the public, towards someone who is provably murderous, what did the retributive justice of Gog actually do wrong, other than that it wanted to be maligned by Waid and Ross by saying it's like the anti-heroism of Liefeld, even though it was far more prudent because he was a proven mass murderer rather than just fighting each other in the street, and he looks like the nations and is named after the nations allied with Satan.
Well, once again, this is all just... I referred to it in my notes as... I won't say the word in its entirety, but there's a lot of S-libbery.
Yeah.
In this story, because these ideals that the superheroes are supposed to be striving towards, they're all depicted as being, oh, it's better to not kill if you don't have to. Even if the person is an absolute genocidal maniac, it's better to kill. It's better to work together with the governmental institutions so that they can implement morality, because that always works out great. Yeah. The institutions themselves are basically infallible. It's all just like all the politicians in this are depicted as, oh, we're just so stressed trying to do the right thing, but all of these private institutions and private actors keep getting in our way when we just really want to make the world a better place.
It's Wilsonian make the world safe for democracy.
Well, Superman at one point even goes to Atlantis to try and recruit Aquaman into his new holy war, and Aquaman just says to him, I've got my kingdom down here that I'm looking after.
Under the sea.
Yeah, under the sea. I don't have your problems. I have to look after 70% of the world, that being the ocean, and look after my kingdom. I have responsibilities. I'm not helping you. So Superman is explicitly an interventionist in this narrative, trying to get other people involved in his wars.
See, that's interesting. So, combining this with the Magog question of whether or not he was right to execute the Joker, was Superman right to lead the reified Justice League, the 7 angels from Revelation, back onto Earth to act as a corrective measure to a degenerative society? Because I found an essay...
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
In practice, in the way that he does it, absolutely not.
Because I think this narrative is containment for the great man of history and his counter-elite vanguard being recaptured and reincorporated in a dialectical process by the establishment hegemony.
That's an excellent interpretation. I like that.
Yeah. So Superman, in many respects, was exercising prudence. He just put the criminals in the wrong place. He should have stuck them in Apocalypse where they could have never gone. And I found this essay by a collection of essays by a bunch of legal scholars and comic scholars, edited by Thomas Giddens, called When Superheroes Kill, Vigilantism and Deathworthiness in Justice League and the like. And it says, in most mainstream American comics, the tension between crime control and due process is set against a backdrop of rampant incompetence and corruption within the criminal justice system. Existing authorities are powerless to neutralize the threats posed by villains, often equal in strength and power to the heroes. It is within this perpetual dystopia that the stage is set for extra-legal justice. Isn't that what Batman did in both Kingdom Come and in The Dark Knight Returns, where Frank Miller set up a dystopian emulation of New York and explicitly said, you need this Dionysian libertarian hero like a Hopper-style libertarian, a king, to come over and have a vested interest in the continuity of the place he rules over, and he will use his prudence to only police rights violations. That's what Superman could have done. Wonder Woman was saying, let's take this problem further and just execute the proven criminals who are killing innocent civilians. And instead, Mark Waid goes, nah, let the UN take charge. It's not like they've ever been incompetent.
And it's only in the last battle when Wonder Woman kills one of the combatants that all of a sudden they go, oh, this is way too far. They're all going to start killing each other now. This is where the end of the world is going to come in.
She kills Von Bock, who's meant to be the rebellious beast fomenting rebellion within the Gulag, but he's also meant to be an allegory for the Antichrist, which leads the nations against Christ on Earth. So she kills Satan.
Oh no, she killed Satan.
All the soy jacks crying to the sky, I guess.
So would you say that this is wearing a biblical skin suit?
Yes. It's wearing the veneer of biblical morality to grant itself legitimacy. But much like people who read the Bible and go, oh, love thy neighbor and don't do an eye for an eye, turn the other cheek. These are people that have inherited the axioms of Christianity that make you nihilistic and excessively charitable to then colonize you with ideology and use your own principles against you. It's like when Tom Harwood tries telling you it's
the libtard version of Christianity.
It's when Tom Harwood tells you that you've got to be compassionate and let every refugee in the country because it's the Christian principle.
No, I don't.
When he hasn't read the Gospel of Matthew, when Christ says, sell all you own, including your cloak, Superman, so you at least own a sword. Christianity is far more forceful than people give it credit for, and far more forceful than Mark Waid depicts in this narrative.
And certainly the believers in Christianity in England in the late, before the Norman conquest, they weren't averse to a bit of force to spread the good word of the Lord.
They all carried swords, and so when Superman was going on his international crusade, the only problem was he didn't carry it out as sensibly as he could have by just exiling them all to the literal hell pits of Apocalypse.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.